for Boittin. I'm the immediate past president of the Western, as well as an associate professor. The rumor has it, as of 2 weeks ago, that my rank will change in 2 months at Penn State. It's not official yet, you know how these things are. And it's an honor to be chairing the Plenary Roundtable today, dedicated to the Tyler Stovall Western Society for French History Mission Prize. Now, some of you, in fact, many of you, were with us in Victoria, British Columbia for the Westerns 2022 conference, and were probably in the room when we awarded the first 3 mission prizes to Abdellali Hajjat, who unfortunately could not join us today, as well as Sylvie, Kande, and Nimisha, Barton, who is in the room today and who's going to be hiding while I say this about her. Others were not present among you and are perhaps even hearing of this prize for the first time. So I'm going to briefly introduce the Mission Prize, its inaugural winners, and today's panelists, who also include Chris Church, who will come in through Zoom. And then each panelist will speak for 5 to 8 minutes on a range of topics related to the prize, some as its creators, some perspectives as its winners and what it can sort of do. And finally, we'll open things up briefly to the audience for questions. And for those wondering why we're returning to this prize despite the fact that it's already been awarded, it's because we realized when our prize winners spoke a few months ago and they were given less than 5 minutes, if memory serves, to speak, we realized that they were just so filled with the energy to say more about our field and how it can do better in the spirit of the Mission Prize, that we needed to give them more time, but also we realized we needed to speak about the sort of raison d'etre of the prize, which meant getting some of the people who helped to put together basically the dossiers, how you actually figure out who should get this prize and what the prize meant to them, into the room as well. But first, let me backpedal a moment before giving them that time, because I want to make sure that everyone in the audience has the same knowledge in hand before we proceed to that general conversation. So the Mission Prize was created in the Western spirit of hospitality, mentorship, service, and engagement to recognize the time and work it takes to maintain that kind of spirit. Work that often goes unnoticed, unrewarded, unremunerated, and unacknowledged by too many of the institutions at which both the academics and people beyond academia in this room work. The prize was a logical continuation of a series of self-reflections in which the Western has engaged in the past 8 years or so. In 2016 to 2017, a DEI committee chaired by the fabulous Christy Pekikero was tasked with imagining ways to make our society be more inclusive by generating ideas with no budget attached to them and ideas with a budget attached to them. So for a year, Christy, Robin Waltz, Andrew Ross, Emily Marker, and I worked on these ideas, and then many other people have worked on them since then. And for example, rewriting our 1974 mission statement with inclusivity in mind, and for the first time since the Western's creation. So once that new mission statement was voted upon by the Governing Council, an engagé committee was created, and the idea of putting money where our words were came up, and this became the Mission Prize. Then, less than 1.5 years ago, the Western unexpectedly found itself mourning one of its former presidents, Dr. Tyler Stovall, the first African-American president of the society, Christy being the second. Many of us mourn him still. Some of us, myself included, had actually nominated Tyler for the inaugural Mission Prize, and many more of us, when we heard the news, immediately pivoted to recommend that we name the prize after him. And our, at the time, President Christy Pekikero, our second, as I said, African-American president, heard us and immediately brought the idea to a vote that passed the Governing Council unanimously. I gave a much more emotional version of this speech in Victoria. I can't do it a second time. It was taxing the first time. So this was because, as many of you know, a crucial part of the Western's mission is to help foster an educational community that is actively committed to achieving equity and inclusion in the production and transmission of knowledge about the Francophone world. To that end, the Tyler Stovall WSFH Mission Prize recognizes teachers and scholars who are doing outstanding work to combat structural inequalities in the field of French and Francophone history and studies more generally, in the profession, in their home institutions, and beyond. by celebrating individuals who are developing tools and practices that challenge inequity, oppression, and discrimination, not only through research but also through teaching, mentoring, and professional leadership. The Tyler Stovall Western Society for French History Mission Prize proudly signals the Western's belief that such work is an essential part of what it means to be an exemplary citizen, scholar, and educator. So the idea for the Mission Prize was launched, but then someone had to serve on the committee that selected its inaugural winners, doing the very kind of work the prize honors. They first had to invent a way to evaluate the unseen and unpaid labor that many of our institutions have yet to figure out how to recognize. So the 2022 inaugural Mission Prize Committee was made up of these hardworking and innovative members of the Western. Liz Everton, Chris Church, Patrick Louis Sullivan de Oliveira, Judith DeGroat, who is here, Ian Collar, and all of this under the excellent leadership of Emily Marker, who is now the Western's current vice president. So thank you, a huge round of applause to all of them. Did I mention you, Judith DeGroat? Yes. Good, double checking. In Victoria, I went into some detail regarding what Tyler meant to us, and as I said, I only made it barely through that tribute without ending in tears. And I want today to be more celebratory in some ways, but let me still say something of Tyler here, because he was generous, egalitarian, humble, a mentor, a cheerleader, and very funny and relatable, despite being a dean, a giant in our field, and a brilliant writer. And thus the Mission Prize became the Tyler Stovall Western Society for French History Mission Prize. As Denise heard, Tyler's wife wrote me a few weeks before the Victoria Conference while congratulating its inaugural prize winners, and I quote her, "I'm glad that Tyler's legacy is living on through his community of scholars and collaborators. It's a wonderful tribute, and I know he would be so honored and proud to have this prize in his name." So here we are, gathering the prize winners and prize creators, always with an eye to the future, since there will be many more people, many of them in this room, I hope, serving and awarding this prize going forward, and thus always more energy and ideas for how we can do better. So now let me introduce first the inaugural prize winners briefly, and then the other speakers. So first, although he's not here, Dr. Abdellali Hajjat is a pioneer in getting critical race theory, Islamophobia, race, colonialism, and other related topics integrated into the curriculum, first in French and now in Belgian institutions of higher learning, and is also a prolific scholar with 2 books recently translated into English, one of which is out there, I believe. And if you don't know his work, look it up. It's worth reading. I'm interestingly appearing to be lacking one of the bios here. Dr. Judith DeGroat, emerita at St. Lawrence University, has let me know she appreciates the opportunities to serve on the Tyler Stovall Mission Prize Committee, the Western Societies for French History, yep, there we go, thank you, the Western Society for French History's Governing Council, and as chair as the Society for French Historical Studies search for the next executive director, who is sitting right here. She is currently, that would be Tabitha Ewing for anybody who missed the announcement yesterday, and Judith is currently working on a project called Friendship and Feminism in Early 19th Century France. Dr. Nimisha Barton, sitting also at that table, is a visiting researcher at UC Irvine and a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant in higher education. As a French historian, her research and writing focuses on gender, sexuality, and immigration. This was the subject of her first book, Reproductive Citizens, which appeared in 2020 with Cornell University Press. As a DEI practitioner, she works closely with colleges and universities to build more equitable campus environments, primarily by training faculty about inclusive pedagogical practices. Her most recent book, A Just Future, How to Get from Diversity and Inclusion to Equity and Justice in Higher Education, is forthcoming with Cornell University Press later this year. And I should be clear that the winners, because I read this in the wrong order, are Abdellali, Nimisha, and now Sylvie Kande, who is the third inaugural winner. Born in Paris to a French mother and a Senegalese father, Dr. Sylvie Kande's work on métissage, hybridity, and the conversations between Africa and the West is well known. In 1998, she organized an international conference at NYU and published the proceedings under the title Discours sur le métissage, Identité métisse, Enquête d'Ariel. She was twice invited to present at the Mellon Humanities Summer Institute at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Cultures. She's also the author of Terre, Urbanisme et Architecture Créole en Sierra Leone with L'Harmattan in '98. And she served as a historian consultant on various large-scale projects, such as the Gorée Memorial in Senegal, as well as the rehabilitation of the public archives in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and digitization of some of the archives, a project which received a Prince Claus Whiting grant in 2022. She was instrumental in securing the UNESCO Slave Routes label for this project and a membership in the International Coalition for the Sites of Conscience for the Sierra Leone Public Archives. She's also the author of 3 award-winning collections of poetry published by Gallimard. One of them, a neo-epic poem, The Never-Ending Quest for the Other Shore, was recently published by Wesleyan University Press. She lives and works in New York City and teaches African Studies at SUNY Old Westbury. So Judith DeGroat was obviously on the inaugural committee, and the final person who will be joining us via Zoom is Dr. Christopher M. Church, an associate professor of history and director of graduate studies at the University of Nevada, Reno, who once hosted the Western, where he teaches colonial, environmental, and digital history. Specializing in disasters, collective action, and civil unrest, his wider research agenda addresses the historical relationship between citizens, the public sphere, and the state. He's the author of Paradise Destroyed, Catastrophe, and Citizenship in the French Caribbean, which won the Alf Andrew Hegoy Book Prize in 2018. This is a humbling round of people to be introducing. I'm very impressed by all of you. So now I'm going to hand things over to Judith DeGroat.
Technology. We're recording this, and thank you. We're recording this, and I'm hoping it will be available to share widely. Jennifer, thank you for that wonderful context, for the introduction, and all your work getting us here. It's been an honor for me to be part of the committee that awarded the first Tyler Stovall Mission Prize. And I'm grateful to each of our colleagues who made up that committee, particularly Emily Marker. As an integral part of the thought and effort that went into clarifying the mission statement of the Society, and then to the conceptualization of the prize to recognize the values of the mission, Emily, in her role as chair of the selection committee, provided astute and good-humored guidance as we developed the processes for selection. Thank you, Emily. The Society's mission, quote, embraces a dynamic, diverse, and engaged scholarly community that is actively committed to achieving equity and inclusion in the production and transmission of knowledge about the Francophone world, unquote. The Tyler Stovall Mission Prize recognizes those doing outstanding work to combat structural inequalities in the field of French and Francophone history via teaching, mentoring, cultural work, activism in communities, as well as scholarship. And importantly, to recognize those so engaged both inside and outside of the formal academy. The task then for the committee was to figure out how to encourage nominations from many parts of our community, how to define the materials needed to understand and assess the candidates' achievements, and most challenging of all, really was incredibly challenging, to make the selection. In addition, committee members are charged, quote, to examine their own implicit as well as explicit biases and assumptions about the academic profession and the study of the Francophone world. This self-reflection will assist committee members to examine all submissions on equal footing, unquote. And I would say also it guided us in helping to think about the guidelines, the whole process. So given this weighty charge, the committee spent significant time discussing how we value, assess, and acknowledge work that is deeply important to our community and beyond. But work not always recognized, and as Jennifer noted, importantly, certainly not compensated. How would we reach a broader group of colleagues than those already plugged into established lines of academic communication and those outside of North America and Western Europe? What would it mean to assess the work of someone teaching in K-12 schools alongside an individual from an R1 institution? How would we assess projects, goals, and materials that come from contexts within different norms of presentation, access to resources, as well as the tradition of understanding scholarship as defined in North America? What types of materials would allow us to understand the impact of a nominee's efforts while not overburdening people already overloaded with work? Finally, what criteria would we use to evaluate the portfolios we received? Certainly some of these questions will be familiar to those who have been involved in other prize committees, but I want to note a difference from my own past experience. Having the mission statement as our guide and the charge to rethink our own assumptions sharpened and deepened each step of our deliberations. As a result, for example, we encouraged self-nominations as well as nominations for the initial round. We did not ask for letters of recommendation, but relied on the statements and portfolios from nominees to document their own work that fosters equity and inclusion. The committee spent a considerable amount of time establishing evaluation criteria that included the breadth of work, the impact made in a range of areas, and the opportunity and context for the work, and included attention to the structural barriers that candidates faced. Speaking for myself, I learned an enormous amount from my colleagues on the committee throughout our discussions that have caused me to rethink my understanding of the meanings, and I use this word reluctantly, of service to our communities, and the context in which that service occurs. And I say I'm reluctant to use the term service because those of us who work within the North American Academy know that category as a demanding and often hollow one, and we need to keep thinking about that. We were surprised and pleased by the number of nominations we received. While many of us know well the challenge of making a selection and awarding a prize, this process was truly wrenching. I want to use that word because there were so many phenomenal people doing wonderful things. The members of our community do and are doing extraordinary work in developing, promoting, and sustaining equity and inclusion in our field and beyond in a broader community. I want to try to convey some of that by sharing just a few of the diverse, creative, and powerful projects that nominees were engaged in. Mentoring students at all levels and in many circumstances, at smaller state schools, large Parisian universities, as well as grade schools. Many of these, well, really given the moment, all of these set in hostile contexts. Advocacy and representation of and for those with a range of disabilities in student organizations, scholarly organizations, and in scholarship. Creating powerful poetry and film and literature that reflects and challenges representations and misrepresentations. Building literary resources, preserving, digitizing, expanding archives that make historical scholarship possible. Direct challenges to Islamophobia, racism, sexual oppression, and other crucial fights for social justice in North America, the Caribbean, Western Europe, Francophone Africa, and Asia. Learning about the work of our colleagues was perhaps the most important gift I received from my participation in the Tyler Stovall Mission Prize Committee. Their work deserves recognition and support, not only by the prize, but by our individual efforts to do so. And I don't only mean by making contributions to the prize fund, but that's a possibility you can think about. At this moment when the study of history and the insights that study gives us is under such attack from so many directions, the work that people are doing to broaden the extent and reach of knowledge, expand the audience for and participation in that work demands our acknowledgement and support. This prize, which honors the leadership and memory of Tyler Stovall, who contributed so much to these goals, is one important way to do so. Thank you.
Sylvie?
Good afternoon. My heartfelt thanks to the organizers of the 2023 joint conference between the Society for French Historical Studies and the Western Society for French History for this opportunity given to me to introduce the work I do in the specific spirit that is mine and that has been deemed worthy of the 2022 Tyler Stovall Mission Prize. Without indulging unduly in biographical fallacy, I would say, though, that the era in which I was born and grew up, which saw the dismantlement of the French colonial empire, and which was one of the main objects of Tyler Stovall's critical analysis, contributed immensely to shape the person I have become and the work I do. While at that time my banlieue, just like the rest of the nation, was struggling to grasp the magnitude of the change taking place and often resorted, like it happens in times of distress, to the comfort of racial thinking and other binary simplifications, my family represented the antithesis of all stereotypes, not in a militant way, but just by being who they were, with as much serenity as circumstances allowed, and a lot of good humor too. For instance, my maternal grandmother from Boittin, Brittany, discovered her own experience of colonization through conversations she had with my father around the symbol, the shame object given at school to prevent children from speaking their mother tongue. My paternal grandfather was one of the first Senegalese teachers of French, while my maternal great-grandfather learned French as an adult when he was recruited as a soldier during World War I, etc., etc. I'm going to just pause, forgive me to just... Forgive me about that. Experiencing those troubled times, and things have greatly improved since then. And when I say not everybody believes me, so experiencing those troubled times incited me to change the course of my studies. After completing a master's in classics, of course, the Senghor's model was etched very strongly in my teenage years, desires and ambitions. I decided to switch to African history, as I wanted to understand my predicament in French society as someone who was either the exception that confirmed the rule, or an example of those who are, in the eyes of many, passing for white, passing for black, to borrow the expression coined by philosopher and conceptual artist Adrian Piper. Since then, I have asserted against all odds that I prefer transdisciplinarity. I write poetry, literary criticism, and historical essays, such as the one forthcoming in the volume 9 of the UNESCO General History of Africa. My second collection of poetry is what I call a neo-epic poem, in which poetry and history collide to deconstruct the masculinist and nationalist tenets of the genre. As you can guess, the truth I'm trying to uncover, regardless of discipline or genre, are plural, situated, and footnoted. But academia has taken a long time to acknowledge that such itineraries could be viable and valuable. Of course, the post-structuralist turn and then the narrative turn opened new possibilities, but the faith in disciplinary borders, the pride in correct corpus and specific methodologies are still quite perceptible. So I'm really grateful that the Western Society for French History and the Tyler Stovall Mission Prize Committee discerned the coherence of my transdisciplinary efforts, a coherence which consists in reframing the representations of Africa through an emphasis on the global conversations, exchanges, and conflicts it has always already been part of, against, of course, theories of continental isolation and exceptionality. This prize encouraged me to keep on looking towards what Michel Rolf-Trouillot calls the unthinkable, that is to say, ideas that in a specific context of intellectual production cannot be conceived because they defy the phrasing of the current questions, the disciplinary norms, and more generally, the eras of horizon of expectations. The Tyler Stovall Mission Prize breaks new ground in that it rewards not just academic accomplishments, but the combination of those with activism for the purpose of combating structural inequality in French and Francophone historical studies and in the profession. In that regard, it has validated a number of my personal commitments that I saw as an extension of both my work and my awareness of historical reverberations and agencies in present times. As an example of a relevant series of activities, I would like to mention the work I did in conjunction with the West African Heritage Consultant Incorporated NGO for the restorations of the Sierra Leone Public Archives, where I spent time doing a major part of the research needed for my dissertation. And this dissertation became, I believe, the only monograph in French on the early history of this nation. I had often looked for reliable partnership to launch a project of renovation of these archives, an invaluable archival cultural heritage resource, and injured by disrepair and other effects of funding scarcity. And finally, I managed to find it in 2020. I identified appropriate funding source that I was already acquainted with, the Prince Claus Foundation, and with other interested parties put a successful bid. So we obtained a relatively large Boittin grant from the Prince Claus. I also served as a liaison with the West African Research Center in Senegal, with UNESCO and the International Coalition for the Sites of Conscience, recruiting a UN Institute for Economic Development and Planning lead librarian, archivist, and digitization specialist, Mr. Antonin Diouf, to come to Freetown and organize a workshop for archivists and library students. This workshop happened in July 2022, and I attended it as an historian and translator. I also secured the UNESCO label slave routes for our project, and I facilitated the successful Sierra Leone Public Archives application for membership in Coalition Sites of Campus, which will give archives access to a network of 350 other sites and an array of resources to complete the work of reputation of the archives. A first result occurred last summer when the lead archivist of the public archives was invited by the relevant ministry in Sierra Leone to write an invoice for the new building that would house in future the totality of the archives. There was also of the students who had performed exceptionally well during the digitization workshop. So I'm grateful to the Stovall Mission Prize for allowing me to pause and realize that commitment to equity, diversity, positive change, and the reconciliation of memories is a professional and recognized endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvie. We will let Chris now speak.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the organizers, the Western and the Society of French Historical Studies, for putting together this roundtable and for giving the Mission Prize prominence as a lunch session. I'd also like to thank the audience and the organizers for allowing me to present via Zoom since I was unable to be there in person. I'd like to use my brief remarks today during this roundtable as a member of the committee that created the prize, as a jury member of its inaugural award cycle, and as the present chair of the selection committee, to discuss the origins and history of, as well as the logic behind the Tyler Stovall Mission Prize, with an eye toward the aims and logic of the prize and the role we hope it'll play in raising the profile of those who conduct important work in making Francophone history a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive academic space. As Jennifer indicated in her introductory remarks, the Mission Prize grew out of the 2017 revision of the mission statement of the Western Society for French History to more explicitly embrace, quote, a dynamic, diverse, and engaged scholarly community that is actively committed to achieving equity and inclusion in the production and transmission of knowledge about the Francophone world, and to think critically about injustice in the academy, and to develop tools and practices to combat structural inequalities in the profession and academic institutions. In 2018, the Western created an ad hoc committee chaired by Christine Picicaro with Emily Marker, Judith Miller, and myself to create a prize that would celebrate those fulfilling the mission of the Western. The goal was to create a prize that would look beyond established academic hierarchies and structures to celebrate those who were doing and here I hesitate to say hidden because the work is so incredibly impactful, so instead I'll say too often structurally overlooked and underappreciated activities related toward to alleviating, mitigating, and ultimately overcoming academic inequalities with regard to race, class, gender, and so on. So to do so, we set out to create a prize that did not rely on traditional systems of academic capital, social capital, or professional networks, which have the potential to buttress the status quo, but instead allow individuals to nominate, to explain and showcase the important work that they're doing with their own portfolios, would take a variety of forms that might in multimedia, syllabi, evidence of urban mentoring, museum exhibitions, artistic expression, and more. In creating capacious portfolios, the prize puts a spotlight on the myriad forms of mentorship, teaching, committee building, activism, and research that's transforming the economy for the better. We wanted to create a holistic image of the potential winner of the prize. Research is one aspect of diversity, equity, inclusion. The impact one makes on the community of scholars and students studying French and Francophone history. Moreover, the organizing committee set out to build a self-reflective, one where the committee examines, as Judith has already mentioned, its own biases and assumptions about the academic profession Francophone world. The organizing committee also has resolved that the Mission Prize should be administered by a diverse group of members from a this diversity helps members to move past professional divisions between research, teaching, and service to instead take a comprehensive approach to the nominees' contributions to the profession, to their home institutions, and to the international community of scholars. This approach entails evaluating leadership, mentorship, non-traditional publications, and traditionally recognized research as constituent parts of what makes French history accessible, relevant, and important to today's society. By 2020, it was clear that the prize, having been approved and funded by the Governing Council, was about to become a reality. By 2021, we were set to begin our first year's nomination cycle, and we're grateful to have two of 2021-2022 cycles honorees, Sylvie and Nimisha, with us here today to give us their perspective on the award and the work that they do and the work that it celebrates. In December 2021, as the inaugural committee under the leadership of Emily Marker, was poised to begin receiving the first cohort of the prize's nominees, we saw the sudden, unexpected passing of Tyler Stovall, a scholar, teacher, and mentor who fully embodied the aims of the Western's mission, a person who brought marginal individuals into the academic conversation front and center through his research, his teaching, and his mentorship. He concerned himself with, as he would put it, people individually and collectively to create a better world. If one were blessed to have Tyler Stovall as a mentor, an advisor, or a friend at any point in his or her career, one had an advocate for life, one who would open doors, provide advice, and go the extra mile to make French history more inclusive. Tyler embraced the notion that there was always room at the table for more people, and that everyone's voice at the table needed to be heard. With that in mind, the committee, with the support of the governing council, unanimously, as Jennifer pointed out, named the prize after him to honor his legacy, as well as commend those who had carried the torch of inclusivity. So in light of all that Tyler gave to the academic community, the Mission Prize acknowledges that all forms of scholarly activity, from teaching, mentoring, and student advocacy, to activism and institutional leadership, to public exhibitions and publishing, to traditional monographs and journal articles, are vital to the profession. It rewards the high-quality scholarship alongside professional leadership broadly conceived that we need to make the Academy, in Tyler's words, a better world. So that's the background as I see it from where the prize came from and what the ideology behind it is. I welcome your questions and the conversation we'll have over the lunch session. Thank you.
And this is Nimisha.
Hi, I'm Nimisha. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so this is very strange to be here. And I wasn't going to say this, but this might be the last time that I'll ever have your attention or have this opportunity. So I just want to say, especially to the graduate students, I'm just going to be real with you. 20 years ago, I did not know that people spent their lives studying history, let alone French history. Like, why? 15 years ago, I had actually started grad school, but I didn't know that there were French professional organizations like this, let alone 2, and I guess now there's 3. And I guess about 10 years ago, I left the academy and I was not interested in looking back. And then 5 years ago, I got really pissed off about it and I wrote the book. So that's pretty much how that happened. And I just want to say that because I definitely never thought that I'd be standing in front of people, being recognized for work that goes on the back of your CV and that nobody really cares about, right? But then that becomes your resume if and when you leave academia or bridge beyond. Where's my engagé people? And so I just want to say, I know it's really cliche, but life is weird and, you know, it's okay if you have a really strange trajectory. So that's all I want to say about that. So the Mission Prize Committee, Chris, and Judith just talked a little bit about how they transformed the application process and assessment and selection practices with an eye towards sort of meeting the circumstances of people who are sort of like me, who are not traditional academics, who are not really in the academy, and yet who still do a fair share of equity work. I think experimenting with different ways of doing things in higher ed, that's something I've been thinking about an awful lot, and that's something I've written extensively about over the last couple of years. So I just want to pull that thread, if you don't mind, and suggest that changing everything overnight always sounds extremely daunting, because it is. But to some extent, we've actually done a lot of that work already, because as awful as the pandemic was and continues to be, it forced us to engage with new ways of thinking and researching and teaching. So I want to focus on that teaching part, actually, because that was the only reason I wanted to be a French historian, because I wanted to be a professor back in the day. So teaching holds a place that's really special in my heart. I want to be clear that just because I'm talking about pedagogy, it isn't to say, and that it was these changes were brought on by the pandemic. I know the pandemic was not and continues not to be a lovely experience, and that everything that I'm about to talk about, it took place under conditions of global crisis, extreme precarity, all of which we still live with. But experimentation, pedagogical experimentation did happen. As you all know, faculty like yourselves had to use new technology in the classroom. I mean, this tech had been around for a long time, but we hadn't really taken advantage of it. I personally didn't know that most of it existed. Many faculty in the room, you decided to focus less on lectures, which makes sense. Instead, you started to focus more on skill building and class dialogues over just pure content delivery, because actually that's more important, right? And also we had lives that we had to live at the same time. A lot of us also realized that an emphasis on sort of student compliance with class policies was not actually the best use of our limited pandemic time and our limited pandemic energy. So in that sense, we could think of the pandemic as this very brutally clarifying moment. So I just want to engage really quickly with some pedagogical orientations that I've been reading about in the last few years and that I think are really helpful, and maybe you will too. So I want to start with what pedagogy expert and American Studies scholar Kate Denial, she calls it a pedagogy of kindness. I know what you're thinking, eyes rolling back into the back of your head, but I want to think about like extending it beyond a pedagogy of kindness, not just towards our students, but also towards one another, and I would also say directed at ourselves as well. Denial published this piece about the pedagogy of kindness actually in 2019, so it predates the pandemic. And the pedagogy of kindness is not about being really nice to people, right? It's about leading with compassion. And she says it's about believing people and believing in people. So I'm just going to give you an example that maybe we don't automatically connect to something like that, but Denial says we should, as faculty, move away from really stringent attendance policies, for examples, and hard and fast deadlines. And I think that's something we all had to do and continue to do. And it's extremely frustrating and challenging. But you know, when we stick to those kinds of deadlines, it can put students in a really uncomfortable position where they have to disclose some very personal details about their lives, just to explain why they couldn't get that midterm to you by Thursday, right? And I'm not saying that this is obvious or that there's a clear and obvious solution, quote unquote, right? But what I am saying is, you know, though it was written in 2019, I would hope that it's really clear how easily this pedagogical orientation meets students' needs and actually our own needs at a time when, as the director of the big bad CDC put it in April of 2022, adolescents are experiencing the worst mental health crisis that we've seen in decades. And this isn't to say that there wasn't and isn't and will not continue to be all kinds of pushback, and I get that. In the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and probably a lot of you saw this, but there's a faculty member who called out the quote-unquote compassion police for creating less rigorous intellectual environments by erring on the side of what she called too much leniency. And then I think in the process implying that rigor and leniency are actually somehow diametrically opposed, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. And here I'm going to call on historian and pedagogical guru Kevin Gannon, who addresses precisely this issue, primarily by separating intellectual rigor from logistical rigor. So he says, and this was in an interview also that appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education, intellectual rigor challenges students' assumptions, spurs their motivation, requires their effort, and increases their skills. And so at the end of the day, intellectual rigor pushes students, pushes all of us to learn. By contrast, logistical rigor expects obedience to stringent classroom policies about, for example, when to turn in work and what policies accrue for late work, right? And such policies are undergirded by an assumption that adherence to policy matters more than producing high-quality work. And it shifts emphasis away from a demonstration of intellectual growth and learning and towards the provision of evidence of obedience to authority. So I think that the shifts in educator mindset that Denial and Gannon, that they suggest, I think they have the potential to really open up a lot of other ways of thinking, and frankly, a lot of other biases, stereotypes, and other kinds of indoctrination that we've all received. So I want to take, for example, those debates over rigor, leniency, resilience, that students need to show more of it, that we're futzing around with these coddled millennial, well, I'm a millennial, these coddled snowflakes, Gen Zers, that sort of thing. It's a debate that's at the heart of not just the culture wars in academia today, but everywhere. To be clear, I do think that most reasonable people are going to agree that some degree of grit and resilience and perseverance are just essential life skills, because they are. But as education professor Bettina Love, she argues the concept of grit is a racially coded concept to denote character education of the variety that we saw actually in the early 20th century when universities implemented it in new admissions policies, for example, to keep ethnically undesirable Jews out of higher education. And what's worse, those historically marginalized students who make it are praised for their grit, and then they are encouraged to draw upon even more of it when they face academic and social challenges in college. And so in many ways, their strengths are being used against them. Their strengths are used against them, and their strengths are used as proof that the system is working and that some students are just not trying hard enough. So I get kind of passionate. Love's point is that an over-reliance on grit and resilience, it erases the unjust distribution of power and resources in the US. And I want to be really clear about that. Yeah, I have to call myself a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant because that's the only way I can be legible to institutions. But I'm a power consultant. What I care about is power and the distribution of resources and what people come in to college with because they've had exposure to it or not because of the way our society is set up. When we erase those unjust distributions of power, when we stop thinking about power and resources, we start to blame society's most marginalized individuals, and we do the same thing in colleges, right? She observes the following very poignantly: measuring students' grit while removing no institutional barriers, then watching to see who beats the odds makes for great Hollywood movies and leaves us all feeling good because the gritty black kid made it out of the hood. But in doing so, she reminds us we fail to acknowledge the hundreds of kids who are left behind because we are rooting for what we have been taught is an anomaly. So grit then is this natural outcome of a belief system that endorses the idea that we can all just sort of bootstrap our way out of structural oppression and that those who have failed have only themselves to blame. I guess at this point I would just encourage you, if you mentor graduate students, to think about what it does to your graduate students. When you create a particular culture, when some people create a particular culture about who succeeds and who doesn't. I have a lot more to say, but that's enough for now. My point is just that pandemic-born innovations are instructed because it offered us, and frankly, it foisted upon us, new teaching methods and models that, as it turns out, are more effective than others, right? So just think about all those annoying Zoom breakout rooms that, however, encourage the number one thing that they say is good for learning, peer dialogue, right? Peer dialogue, interaction, peer learning, right? Less emphasis on lectures. And if we dig deeper, I actually think that those changes in some of our practices and maybe some of our perspective as also, they could be an invitation to rethink our worldviews too. Because I think along the way, we also need to rethink the language that we use to not just judge our students, but also to judge one another and ourselves. So, thank you.
So you only heard from two of them, but I think you can see how our inaugural Mission Prize winners are so amazing, each in their own ways, in terms of what they've contributed to their institutions and, frankly, to the world. So thank you, Nimisha. Thank you, Sylvie. Thank you, Judith and Chris, for your comments. We have about 10 minutes for questions from the audience to any of the panelists. We have mics. We have this mic. So any questions? This can be about the prize itself, follow-up questions about the kinds of work that the inaugural winners have done, or any other comments or questions. Do we have any? Or is everyone just done with their meal and needs a break? I see a question back there. Let me get it.
I'm just wondering if you would...
Wait, they won't be able to hear you.
Behind. Could you hold one for the recording?
You get 2 mics.
All I'm going to ask is if you would post a document with some of the resources that have been mentioned and names for those of us that probably missed them as we were eating our chocolate cake.
Yes, I don't have the mic, but I can say. Yes, I mean, one of the things that the Western is going to be working on is those kinds of resources. That's one of the things that the Bridges and Engagés Committee is particularly committed to, and some of those are going to be about pedagogy and equity and inclusion and diversity and how we can support and mentor our students, undergraduate or graduate. So that is one of the things that, in fact, Nimisha has been helping us to work on in that Bridges Engagés Committee, among others. So there is a lot more that's going to be coming out on these questions. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Tip? There's 2 mics coming your way, so just...
Can you pass this? Sorry.
I have to talk like that as
Yes.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel and the opportunity to learn from the collective wisdom that's been brought together here. I'm so grateful for what you're doing for our broader community. And Nimisha, I wanted to also just highlight a certain kind of appreciation I have for you challenging us when you were talking about graduate training and how we structure it. And that's a really brave thing to say to a community like ours. You know, you didn't have time to elaborate on those ideas. I know that sotto voce, we talk a lot about these among ourselves. At Colorado College, where I teach, I'm so happy about this, and at Bard, where our new executive director for the Society for French Historical Studies is coming in, that in the last 2 weeks, those institutions have decided to pull out of the ranking system of the U.S. News and World Report. We'll still be ranked, but we're going to be ranked much, much lower because we won't be contributing data and all that. And I'm so proud of that, although it's scary. And I hope, and I think it's a way of trying to confront some of these kinds of systematic injustices that lead to privilege certain types of people. This is at an undergraduate level, but the thing is that I think it's incumbent on all of us in a way to go to our institutions and make those kinds of demands of our many administrators, actually, to try to encourage them to take those kinds of steps, not necessarily that particular step. But I think that the graduate training, I'm not any longer at an institution that trains graduate students, but there's been a lot of benefit, I think, in a kind of unquestioning way to expand graduate programs right and left, and I can see why people enjoy that and prefer to do that. But I just think that we need to have a little critical distance in what we are all doing, and it does benefit us in certain kinds of ways. Not just that, but there are many ways that we are benefited from the kinds of changes that we've enacted in the course of the last 30 or 40 years. And so if we can continue to have discussions, maybe fostered by you and other people, to start to take on those structural issues and how we're also good, like we hate neoliberalism and all that. We are the neoliberals par excellence, and we have benefited from that. And it's time to really think critically about that and figure out how to dismantle that. So thank you very much for this, and I'm really encouraged, and I look forward to so many more conversations about these kinds of issues.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Tip. Any other questions or comments or reactions? Mita. Yes, really. One's for recording, one's for hearing.
Again, thank you for all of that, all of the work that went behind it. And I guess what I have a comment is about is one of the things you're all inviting us is to be uncomfortable. And that's hard. And I wonder, I wonder about the people who left and whatever, is there's a discomfort, but that's the real work. That's what we do in the classroom with our students and where they really learn. And we need to have the courage, and I think it's there to do that, to be uncomfortable when we look in the mirror and think about the ways in which we do it. And I would say that just let's learn to sit with that discomfort and know that we actually have each other to support through that, but to get past that and not to avoid it. And this award and these winners and these committees, I think, are really showing us that way. So thank you.
Thank you so much for reminding of that. The discomfort is okay sometimes. In fact, it's necessary sometimes. I'm running in the other direction with the mic. Emily?
It's really nice to be amplified because I lost my voice and was in 2 panels this morning. Thank you, Sylvie and Chris and Judith and Nimisha and Jennifer for making this happen. It was wonderful to be a part of this as an audience member as opposed to an animator. But I just wanted to pick up on, Mita's comment. When we rewrote the mission and we formulated this prize, we were also talking about empowerment, but empowering us, like empowering the people in this room to feel like they can do this stuff and, take it on ourselves and bring that message home to our home institutions and then empower our communities at home. So it's really, I love what Nimisha said about, being a power consultant, and she is a power consultant, and she empowers us to think big and do this stuff ourselves. So I just wanted to really echo that and amplify that. So thank you, everybody.
All right, we only have like 2 minutes left, and I love the idea of ending on the empowerment note, so unless anybody objects, I'm gonna say thank you to all our panelists, and take this and feel empowered, and also self-nominate and nominate for the next round of the Tyler Stovall Mission Prize, because this will become an annual, or this is an annual prize now, so there will be more, and many people here also deserve to win this, and we know that. So think about that as well. And mostly just think about feeling empowered, because as difficult as it is, we really can do this work as a community and as individuals. So thank you for being here and listening, and a very warm round of applause to the inaugural winners and the committee.